Weirding Way Media.
Hello and welcome to episode 128 of the Filmumentaries podcast. I'm not going to keep you long this week. I'm in a very busy period of work. I'm on a podcast in about an hour, the Projection Booth podcast. Have a listen out for that. It's all about Return of the Jedi. That'll be out later on this year. Then I'm straight into a 3-day training course, then into doing the expert panel, The Star Wars Influence at the BFI. And then I am doing the Formula One Grand Prix Canada remotely at wonky hours. And then I've basically got a day to pack, and then I'm off to Martha's Vineyard for our Joe Alves shoot. And there's a lot to organise with that as well. So this is an interview from the archives. It's an interview with a gentleman called Anthony Forrest. He famously played one of the characters who was to be Luke Skywalker's friend at the Tosche Station. Of course, those scenes were cut out, but he did appear in a stormtrooper costume as the guy that says, "These aren't the droids we're looking for, move along, move along." I had a chat with him, more than 10 years ago now. So this one, as I said, is from the archives. It's on a telephone call, so it's not the usual standard of audio, but I hope you enjoy it anyway. I'll be back at the end for a little tiny bit more jabbering on.
Hello?
Hi, Anthony. It's Jamie.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very well. Yourself?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just, this life seems crazy these days.
Really busy.
Yeah.
Are you working on that film still?
The film, but also I'm going into the recording studio in May.
Oh, wow. For the music stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
But also there's a couple of events. I'm going to Belfast tomorrow for 4 days.
Uh-huh.
But then in April I'm going to Celebration Anaheim.
Oh, right, you're going over there. Yeah, because, when I saw Anaheim originally, I thought that sounds like it's in Germany or something, but it's California, isn't it, Anaheim?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. It's where Disneyland is.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Where the original Disneyland is, yeah.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, I'm out in Bahrain, I think, when that's happening, so... yeah, conventions are not necessarily my sort of thing, but I would have thought maybe about going to that one, but I'm doing my Formula One coverage stuff, so I'm out in the Middle East.
Right.
Yes. Well, thanks for agreeing to an interview. I know that Toby's one has worked out really well.
Right.
We got it picked up by quite a few websites and things, and I'm just trying to do kind of one a month at the moment.
Right.
Maybe that's a bit too much, but
well, it's got to be a lot of work tracking people down and trying to organize schedules.
Well, this is the problem. The advantage that I've got is that because my work takes me all over the place, I'm around at strange hours as well. So maybe I can fit in with people. So yeah. Did you have a quick look at the questions?
Yeah, I did have a quick look. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's not limited only to those. As I said, what I've done with these interviews is that I'm recording both of us. I've got myself on one leg, you on another leg, so I can sort of get rid of myself, as it were.
Right.
So when I ask you something like, can you tell me how you got in Star Wars? If you could say, I got involved in Star Wars by, kind of repeat the question back.
Right, sure.
People won't hear my question. So should we delve straight in?
Yeah, we can do that, yeah.
Okay. So can you tell me how you got involved with Star Wars? Did you have an audition or, tell me about what happened.
Yeah, well, the way I got involved with Star Wars was really through a combination of events. One was the fact that I'd done a film called The Eagle Has Landed, which was John Sturges was directing, and that was the film with people like Michael Caine, amazing cast actually. Donald Pleasance, there's a wonderful cast that was put together, and it was that was a follow-on from something else I'd done at the BBC. But it was really, I got called in through my agent at the time, Michael Anderson, and I went in to meet Irene Lamb, and I got cast in The Eagle Has Landed, and she happened to become the casting director for Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And so that was really an introduction through Irene Lamb when George Lucas was in London looking at casting for Star Wars. He'd done casting in Los Angeles, from my understanding, and then he was doing like secondary casting in the UK.
Okay, and you were based in the UK at that point then?
Yeah, I was based in London at that time. I'd originally, even though having been born in England, I was raised in Montreal, and had originally come back in 1974, and I'd started on a series which is BBC sequel to Anne of Green Gables, which is Anne of Avonlea, which is a Canadian story. And that series was starring Kim Braden, and so I had a small role in that series, and then things kind of spearheaded from there, where I started picking up work in London. I did in those days, there were a number of, today they're well-known directors, Ridley Scott, Adrian Lyne. I did, I think, nearly 12 commercials with Ridley Scott, which he's doing a series of commercials at that time for Johnson & Johnson. They were called there was a deodorant, if I remember, it was called Us. And so they created this kind of fictitious rock band that had, some backing singers and had some musicians. And having being a musician myself, I got cast as a keyboard player in the band.
Great. Yeah, because Ridley Scott, I think he ended up, didn't he direct the Hovis advert or something, the famous one with the cobbled street and all of that stuff?
Yeah, he did. That was really an award-winning commercial. But the commercial company that Ridley Scott had, and subsequently with his brother and him together, that was an incredibly successful commercials house, producing enormous amounts of commercials, and which was always the springboard, actually, I think, that enabled Ridley to move into feature films. And that was similar to a number of directors at the time. There was Alan Parker, there was Adrian Lyne. These were all kind of a generation of commercials directors who were moving across into feature film, because that was their passion and their desire.
Mm-hmm. So when you were originally cast in Star Wars, you were cast for the part of Fixer initially.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the Fixer. I had kind of read. I'd met. It became a kind of a back and forth process where I went in a couple of times to meet with George Lucas, and there was not necessarily specific reading for roles. It seemed he was just trying to get a handle on who you were and what the possibilities that you might offer. And so I think I'd read a couple of lines out of Han Solo's role. I'd read a couple of lines from a few different things, and so it was really. I think that was something that he was still probably just surveying what the territory had to offer, really.
Because I know that he cast, Mark Carey and Harrison as an ensemble, really. And if he'd not gone for one of them, he might have gone for another three entirely. I wonder if George was also trying to cast you, like, as he did with Q Stark and Garrick Hagan as well. I wonder if he, was trying to cast you as a group as well to see how you work together.
Yeah, I think probably that was the case. In the sense that this was supposed to be a group of these characters that knew they were friends, knew each other. They were in this kind of isolated environment, and so it was like not so much like a club, but I mean I know there was. Years later, there was, comparatives made to the groups that were created during American Graffiti.
Yeah.
And so that probably was something that's kind of naturally occurred through the screenplay as well, and the situation where there had to be some kind of level of either camaraderie or bonding between these characters.
Yeah, yeah. And I understand you traveled to Tunisia as a group. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Tunisia,
yeah, we
yeah.
did. We did travel as a group, although I don't have a lot of recollection of the traveling out there. To be honest, it's kind of it's kind of gone into a haze in my mind. How what that first the journey out there. I kind of remember the journey back more than I remember the journey out there. I think I was just probably. I think I was probably just awestruck in being able to leave the rain for a while to get to the sunshine.
And I remember when I was down at the BFI watching the screening a couple of months ago that you mentioned on stage that you had a little excursion out one day with Garrick and Mark on horseback.
Yeah, it was really. I had this, and this is just my kind of vivid imagination. Where when arriving in Tunisia, it was an environment that I've never been in before. But I think it was what occurred to me was the whole atmosphere of Tunisia, and I was imagining I kept imagining Lawrence of Arabia, and I was kind of seeing this. I was having all this imagery, and so I thought, oh my God, they've got these fantastic Arabian horses and stuff like that, and so I wanted to go riding across the desert sands, and I kind of roped a few other people into it, which is not a great idea. I understand from an insurance perspective, but you're in your mid-20s and you're reckless. What can I say?
Yeah, I was talking to Garrick about this the other day, and he said, I said I can imagine you all sort of going through the dunes, but it was along the sea shore, wasn't it? Because you're in Jerba, I think. So you went
That's right.
riding
Yeah,
along. Yeah.
it was a beautiful place. Trust me, it was actually a great thing. Had we filmed that, it would have looked fantastic. It really was a spectacular moment to just enjoy that. Yeah.
Yeah, because that I've seen shots that recently surfaced of up on the balcony, as it were, there, and that's sort of looking out to sea, which you don't, of course, see from the camera's view. The camera's looking with the sea behind it. So I
Right.
think for quite a few people, it's a surprise that that's the geography of the place.
Yeah, it is because well, it's like anything on film. There's so much cheating that goes on in terms of locations and camera angles and that it's sometimes when you see the reality of where it was and where something was shot, then you think, oh, that just our imagination allows us to imagine a lot of other things, and yet the reality is quite different.
Mm. And I know when many people have talked about being on set that there was, they'd read the script, they didn't understand it, and the English crew were kind of poo-pooing Lucas and saying, thinking it was some sort of low budget sub Doctor Who kind of production. What was your thoughts at the time? Did it feel like a big production you were on? Did it feel, had you
Well,
heard of George Lucas, etc.?
yeah, I had heard of George Lucas. That was mainly through American Graffiti, but also remembering that I was at that time. I think I'd gone back to visit family a couple of times in the course of a year, and so I was at that period. Movies were not being traveling. It was like a 6 month wait practically before a film that was released in the United States actually showed up in the UK cinemas. And so American Graffiti hadn't really traveled yet, and so I was aware of it, and it's the success that was coming off the back of that. So I was probably a little more up to date than a lot of the crew in that were in terms of what George's potential was and what he was capable of, and in terms of telling a great story. And I think the thing that threw a lot of people was the fact that we were still in a phase in terms of filmmaking where science fiction hadn't really evolved in the way it even has now, but in those days hadn't evolved in terms of special effects and the possibilities and the potential to actually bring an atmosphere and an environment to life that really felt realistic.
Yeah.
That felt like you were there and had the dimensions and the parameters and created an atmosphere and environment that as a cinema goer, when you're locked in that cinema, you felt you were there, and felt that you were really experiencing it. Remembering that through the 50s and that a lot of sci-fi had been kind of done on was just still experimenting with it, and a lot of You're going back to the days of paper plates on wires and things like that. So in looking at the script, I can understand how people couldn't imagine how this was going to piece together, because it would be going from what would be an exterior situation to a potential interior situation, to all of a sudden all of this activity that was in space, in battle fights and things like that, that everybody probably figured were going to look incredibly hokey and very B-movie-ish.
Yeah.
Whereas, from my understanding, the filmmakers in Los Angeles at that time, the young filmmakers, which were people like Spielberg and Lucas and a number of others, had a great belief in the possibilities of working in special effects and sci-fi, having been inspired by 2001.
Sure.
And I think that was the film that really opened a lot of people's eyes in the younger film community to the possibilities, and the giving the go, not the go ahead, but it was almost like a green light to saying we can do this. We can actually really create another world on film and make it feel real and believable.
Yeah, and they showed everybody what they could do. So then, how long did the shoot in Tunisia last? Because then you flew back to London to do the interior scenes. Is that right?
Yeah, I was there probably a week or a little over a week. They'd been out there. They'd been filming several weeks, I think, before. I was also constructing sets and scouting locations and things like that. Prior to arriving to do the fixer scenes. So I was there. I guess it was a week or just over a week. I can't. I did.
Difficult to remember.
Yeah, probably somewhere somebody has the schedule from the original shoot.
True. I could probably dig that out from somewhere. And then, did you go out again to do because you were then in a stormtrooper outfit? I mean, talk to me a little bit about that. Did you know you were going to be a stormtrooper?
Yeah,
had you tried the suit on before?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's stormtrooper, sandtrooper. I mean, the delineation of the various characters being stormtroopers, sandtroopers, or snowtroopers, I think didn't really start to evolve until the merchandising, in being able to define characters more clearly in terms of merchandising. But it was really that I was waiting to do a sequence with the fixer character when Robert Watts came to the hotel to get me and asked if I could come to the set because George wanted to talk to me. So we drove out to location, and I was it was really a do or die situation where George walked up to the car as we were pulling up and said, with a script in his hand, he said, "Look, can you do me a favor?" And I said, "Sure, what's up?" And so he explained it to me and showed me the script and that, and said not to worry because it won't affect the fixer's character because I'm going to be in uniform, and so nobody's going to be able to, you're going to be covered in a costume. And that was when, as I was actually looking at the lines and reading through the script and trying to get the context of the scene in my head, I was being dressed. I was actually I was practically not even aware of what they were putting on me. I was concentrating on the scene and just allowing them to kind of dress me. And it was kind of, then I started to, it was not till I was almost all, pretty much dressed did I start to actually see what I was, the costume proper. Yeah.
And how was that in the heat out there in that costume? Pretty unpleasant, I would think.
Yeah, it was. The unpleasantness, to be honest, was more in the scratchiness, in the mobility, the lack of mobility. It was the inside of the costume was very raw and scratchy. Felt like I don't know if you've ever, as a kid, I'd worked on a neighbor's with his neighbor's friends, and I used to hang out. And I remember their dad fiberglassing a boat.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like that. It reminded me of that material, the inside of it. It was very scratchy. Plus, the day before, I'd been in the sun and picked up a bit of a sunburn, so I was really feeling it. on my shoulders. But it was pinching in various locations behind in the knee joints, the back of the knee, and in the on the arm joints and things like that.
I think Star Wars' cultural impact has just increased over the decades, and I think a lot of people like yourself have then become involved in the conventions and stuff in the 2000s. And I mean, your lines as a sandtrooper in the film have become quite iconic. Move along, and these aren't the droids we're looking for. All those things. I think they've been parodied. They've been on some of the animated comedies and stuff. How does that feel to be involved with part of that?
Well, I think it's very, from just purely from an actor's perspective, it is very rare that you do something and you're involved in something where you play a scene or you have a moment on film and that it becomes, to a certain extent, screen history. And the fact that it's transported itself into becoming, one of those, what a lot of people like to say is an iconic scene in Star Wars. It's just so gratifying because you work on different films or television and things like that, and a lot of it it falls by the wayside. It's not many people will pull it back out and look at it years later and it doesn't kind of hold a place of memory in terms of just a piece of product. It kind of just it moves along, to put it bluntly, and so when you actually are involved in something that has that staying power and that longevity, and that kind of recognition, is very unusual. I mean, it's just interesting because I'm practically now meeting a fourth generation Star Wars fan. Mm. And that is interesting because it's become almost like a rite of passage in the same way I think a little bit like you would find a rite of passage in sports families that are supporters of particular sporting teams. Mm-hmm. If you're a Chelsea or an Arsenal fan, or in the States if you're a Yankees fan, or in ice hockey, if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan or a New York Rangers fan, you're kind of your dad was a fan and you become a fan, and then you kind of hand it on because it's part of your community as well.
Yes, that tribal sort of instinct we have, isn't it?
Yeah, and so Star Wars does have that element to it, but it has it on a global level, which is really very special.
And just going back to that scene briefly, the move along bit. I mean, you're standing there learning the script, being stuffed into this suit, and then you have to deliver the lines to Alec Guinness. I mean, you were film aware at that time. Were you kind of aware of the sort of gravity of the situation, as it were?
Yeah, I was, and I mean, for me, it was just as a young actor, it was just such a great moment to be able to first of all, to meet Alec Guinness, to get to work with him, to chat with him, and it was just, it was, you kind of, you do two things are happening. One is you're in awe because you're getting this opportunity, but at the same time, you're also really have to resolve your mettle to actually focus on the moment and why you're there. And to be able to deliver, just on the drop of a hat. And I suppose that's something that I had done in having really started in theater. That was one of the areas that of work that you do in theater is improvisation and just to exponentially just carry something through. And just to pick it up and go with it, it's a kind of like that, the show must go on attitude. So when you get dropped into a situation like that, it's really, you've got to kind of try and hit a home run and just absolutely focus on that moment, and not let all the extraneous stuff, distract you, because it was so there was a whole load, and also, it was. I was very fortunate because Alec Guinness is such a wonderful, he's such a wonderful man, and also such a great professional, in the sense that he understood the situation I was being put in, but also So it was like he was a great leader in that respect,
That's great.
and very, very kind to me.
No, great. You often hear that about Alec Guinness. I've read a lot on him over the years, and I think he sort of peels back that knighthood aspect of him and the experience, and he's just it seems to come across as a very genuine, humble kind of guy.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was, we didn't share that much time together in Tunisia, in reality, but it was interesting because years later, I was doing an episode of Bergerac, the TV series, and we were filming a sequence at Ealing Studios, and he was working at Ealing Studios as well, and we happened to be in the same makeup room at one point. And he came up. When I walked in, he absolutely knew and remembered everything. And when we had a chat, it was just one of those things that, he was incredibly down to earth and very real about the profession, and a great humanitarian.
Yeah, I think that's part of his craft, isn't it? He knows that part of the job is being a people person and, getting good performances out of people and making your performance better. I'm sure he understands the mathematics of it. Yeah,
it's a good, when you're working, as an actor, it is about your human quality and the give and take and the relationship that you create. You're there. It's about being there for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
Over the years, and I have learned, and I've seen it time again. Everybody leaves all the great people leave their egos at the door. Mm-hmm. They don't bring it into the moment around. It's all about sharing and giving each other the opportunity to do the best possible work you can.
Yeah, I think in the opposite way of looking at it is it's if you do come in with the ego, you're almost looking for somebody to blame when things go wrong.
Yeah, it's well, filming is an incredibly stressful situation to be in. Shooting digital is a little less stressful but in the days, when you're shooting 35 millimeter film, that's an expensive process. It always was an expensive process. And so you're always limited to the amount of time and takes, although I've worked with directors who go way overboard on the number of takes, which in terms of what's printed versus how many takes there are. But that's, besides that, it's you have an awful large responsibility to bring the goods to the table at a specific moment in time. And to kind of nail down that moment. And so I do understand when actors, especially when they're playing those very demanding lead roles, when they're on edge, because that's a great weight to carry on your shoulders.
I'm sure. Just a couple more questions then, Anthony. You mentioned when we started speaking that you remember the flight home more and chuckled. I wonder if there was a story in there.
Well, yeah, there is. As I recollect, the plane had a number of seats taken out of the front area, which would have been behind the cabin, where there was probably, I don't know how many rows were missing, but they were putting camera equipment in there. And there was a lot of equipment that was going into that section where the seats weren't there. So there was a gap between us and there was and the camera equipment. But in amongst this was a crate of champagne. And it's hard to say after you have that kind of experience, but I do remember, I'm pretty sure I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure Mark Hamill would vouch for it, is the fact that Alec Guinness got up and he handed Mark and I each a bottle of champagne, and he had a bottle of champagne with his wife. And so when Mark and I arrived back in London, we were quite jolly.
That's great.
We had also, I think Mark and I had also discovered a box of triangular sticker shapes, which was the Star Wars logo. You know, those triangles with Luke Skywalker holding the saber into the sky and that. And we had basically unpicked those and stuck them all over our jackets, on our arms, on our chests, everywhere. Yeah.
Cool. That's a great little story.
Uh,
So, yeah, just two more questions. Obviously, Star Wars has been changed a number of times over the years. I think at the BFI, you told that little story about seeing it with some of the crew and somebody shouting out, you know. Well, you can explain it.
well, yeah, that was really in Los Angeles. In 2007, when they held the 30th anniversary, there was the Academy Awards was screening Star Wars as an anniversary moment. And so there were quite a few people who were invited, and actually at that point they invite all the award winners. So that you had all the special effects people, the people from the editorial departments, etc., sound and that, who were the Academy Award winners on Star Wars, and so it was quite a moment and an event. And Carrie Fisher was there, Mark was there, also Alan Ladd Jr. was there, John Dykstra. I mean, there was quite an important array of people. George Lucas was there, Gary Kurtz. There was quite an important array of people who were involved in Star Wars. And it was interesting the fact that when the film actually came up, there were a number of people in the audience who were quite vocal, and I got a feeling this was coming from crew and things like that. The behind the scenes people, that they were yelling out, where's the fucking film? Because they were showing a digitized version of the film. And, these are diehard, filmmakers who love film and love the quality of film, in its original format. We're going back to, being able to look at a film and see that occasional scratch or, the occasional flicker or dust, etc. And so when the digitized, absolutely clean version came up, some people in the audience got vocal about it and saying, where's the film? Where's the fucking film?
And I guess a reaction to the fact that some of their original film effects had been replaced by digital ones.
Yeah, that wasn't so much in that version.
Right,
actually.
okay.
That wasn't in that version that we were watching. But what was, it was great actually to be able to be there, because also there were some, I don't recollect them all individually, but there were some great stories because there was quite a large panel of the award winners, and then Carrie and Mark and George and that were up on stage giving a talk and the discussion afterwards. Okay. About the experience, because mainly this was all, they were all talking about A New Hope, and so it was all really revolving around the experience of A New Hope.
Mm-hmm. And I know that Star Wars is one of the many things you've been involved in. I've just, wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of tell people what you do now and what you're involved with and what your latest projects are, because, as I said to you, from a slightly cynical point of view, Toby's interview got out there to, nearly 200,000 people. So if there's anything you want to mention now, then.
Yeah. Well, in terms of what I've been doing over the last few years and more or less what I've been focused on is really my own work. I came from a fairly creative family and background, so I was always allowed to be able to explore my creativity as an individual. And when I went to school, what I was studying was when I went to college, I was music composition. And my instruments at that time were flute and oboe, although you were required to also have some key experience in keyboards. But and although growing up in the late '60s and that, it was really about guitars and rock and roll. So in the last few years, I've been kind of I tend to get dragged back into working on music a lot. It really came out my reasserting myself back into my music wholeheartedly really came about it. I was directing a short film in Los Angeles, and we didn't have there wasn't really the budget for the music, and so the producer turned to me and said, "Look, you do music. Can you put some music together for us for the film?" And that kind of I got my guitar out again, and that started. It's a dangerous thing. You get your guitar out of a case again and start playing. because it just kind of got all the creative music juices go flowing again. But I have, over the years, I've written a number of screenplays, sold some, had some optioned in that, and also um, in 2000 we went in and we filmed one of my screenplays. It's a very, very low budget film. It's called The Ballad of Bob's Garage, and I'm finally now, even after all these years, finally getting the courage to actually get it completed. In that, I I think sometimes I get too I po- I make that grave error of polishing things too much, where you kind of just, especially when you get in with film and worry about editing and wanting to make it everything absolutely perfect. Sometimes you just have to do these things and let them go out there into the universe and live their own lives.
Yeah, it's exactly how I feel with my projects. I've done some feature-length documentaries and things, and you could spend hours and days and weeks and years tinkering with them, and eventually you just have to say, "Fuck
Yeah.
it, it's got to go out there."
Yeah, it is that tinkering is really something that is such a danger. You know, when I was doing a screenplay, I've got a couple of books I've been, the fictional novels that I've been working on, and I would spend umpteen hours fussing over a particular piece of dialogue or just a sentence sometimes. So what I've done in May, I'm going into recording studio to record an album in a day.
Wow.
Mainly because what I also do is I have the opportunity to go busking in London, and so I have a license to busk in the London Underground. And so I sneak up into London, and I don't have to sneak, but I go up just, and quietly go busking in the London Underground station. Mainly, it's one of the best places to rehearse your music. So these are all original songs that I do, and rather than just rehearse at home or etc., it's a fantastic place to go and rehearse. And also you kind of get this feedback from people as they're passing by.
Is there any particular station you like busking at then?
Well, I like Bank Station. There's 4 different locations in Bank you can busk. I like the London Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite good. King's Cross has opened up. That's become quite an interesting station. Some are better for acoustics. Southwark is a station that not a lot of buskers bus, but it's got fantastic acoustics in it. It's because it has such a large atrium. So there's a number of stations. You kind of it's kind of a phone-in process as a licensed busker, where you actually book by phone specific locations for 2-hour sessions.
Great. Well, I know that if I hear a busker who's worth his salt, and it cheers up my day anyway. So if I ever see you, I'll make sure I've got some change in my pocket.
Yeah, it's interesting that I don't know how it's become, having not done it that long, how it's transferred for buskers who have been doing it for a number of years now, in the fact that everything is now becoming carded, for instance, Oyster cards and things like that. So I don't know how, if people are carrying as much change as they used to in the old days.
True. Well, you need to get yourself a little PayPal terminal or something.
Right. So or a swiping machine. So people, so they can actually, contribute funding via their Oyster card.
Yeah, their Oyster credit. Yeah, that's a good idea.
I was actually looking, I don't know, maybe if you know somebody, I was actually looking to have somebody come in and film what I was doing with the recording in Brighton.
Oh, right, okay.
Studio.
Okay.
Because I thought, I'm taking this, I'm basically gonna do what I do in terms of busking, and that's the idea, is to just go in and knock the songs out.
Oh, right, okay.
In that same way. So I was doing, on the 15th of May, I'm taking the studio for 10 hours to record it, and then on the 21st or 22nd, then I'm going back in the studio to mix.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll if I could think of anybody, I'll drop you those details.
And it's in May, and it's just it was really just to have something that's kind of like behind the scenes.
Yeah, sure.
Fly on the wall kind of thing, and then to be able to maybe extract from that what can become visuals for music videos.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. Great.
Okay.
All right. Lovely. Thanks, Anthony.
Okay. Cheers, Jamie.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation there with Anthony Forrest, an archival interview. I think that was one of the first few I ever did back in the day. Funnily enough, I ended up doing that recording of Anthony recording his album in one day. I went down there with a couple of cameras, a couple of DSLRs, and my friend Mark Tomlinson, who does what I do in TV as well. And he had a couple of radio mics, and we shot the whole thing. He recorded that album in one day and we provided him with the footage. I don't know what ever happened to that. Maybe he made it into something, or maybe not. As I mentioned in that, I met Anthony initially at the BFI, a screening in 2015. And talking about the BFI, as I said in the intro, the Star Wars Influence talk is at 3:30 at the BFI on the 12th of June. Very soon. We still have bits to finalise on that. Doug Weir and I. Doug Weir of the BFI and of this podcast many times. And then, off to Martha's Vineyard. The GoFundMe is still up. Please donate if you can. We're being absolutely rinsed on the price of hiring a car on the island and hiring accommodation on the island. I've had to buy some new sound gear as well. So it's going to be an expensive trip. But I really do appreciate all of your support, those of you that have already donated. And if anybody else is able to help, just $10 or £10 or something, anything will contribute and will be gratefully received. As I said, this is just a quick one, so I'll leave you to maybe go back and listen to an episode that you've not heard before, and I'll be putting another episode out on the 4th Tuesday of this month, June 2023. I've got a few options and I'm undecided. Maybe I'll do something from Martha's Vineyard. I've got a few ideas going on in my head, but maybe that's too much work to do as well as doing the shoot there. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.